There is no off the record on it, like you've told me.
No. You I've done a number of interviews over the years, and my main reason for engaging the media is to keep pressure on the police
Yeah.
to do their job. And I've never wanted the questions in advance because I want to respond spontaneously. If I have a made-up answer, then I'll think, what was my answer for this question? I'd rather just, ask the question and I'll spontaneously respond. But anyway,
Why 118? That's something that everyone's obsessed with.
yeah, there's
Do you-
she on national television said, "Well, I knew he was guilty because I saw it in his eyes." I thought, well, that's quite a talent. But she was way in over her head and not. I don't think she's playing with a full deck. And I told Linda Arndt, the detective, I said, "Look, that suitcase should not be there."
And you told her this before you guys found John Bonet?
Yeah, I said maybe.
I'm Marcus Wren, creator of the Tell Index, a 50-signal system for analyzing statements and behavior in criminal cases. Today's video breaks down a recent long-form podcast interview with John Ramsey, recorded roughly 3 decades after his daughter's murder, ahead of a new Netflix documentary on the case. Subscribe if you want more analysis like this.
To start, I feel like there is this perception that when you do kind of interviews that they're very orchestrated, or there's this party line and they're like, oh, John's so composed, or it's John's tales. And we reached out to you. There is no off the record on it, like you've told me.
I've done a number of interviews over the years, and my main reason for engaging the media is to keep pressure on the police to do their job. And I've never wanted the questions in advance because I want to respond spontaneously. If I have a made-up answer, then I'll think, what was my answer for this question? I'd rather just, ask the question and I'll spontaneously respond. And it could be, when did you stop beating your wife? And no boundaries, on the questions.
I got lots of questions.
Yeah. And so it's easier for me.
Yeah.
It's almost like I don't have to prepare.
Ideal. Well, I did prepare.
Asked directly about the perception that his interviews are orchestrated, John Ramsey's answer is immediate and polished. No off the record, no advanced questions, pure spontaneity. This is code A8. Overly rehearsed, checking whether an answer arrives with an unusually clean, prepackaged structure for something being described as unplanned. Cross-referenced against the record, the framing itself is what's notable. John Ramsey has conducted dozens of on-camera interviews across nearly 30 years. CNN's Larry King Live in 2000, ABC's Good Morning America, CBS's 48 Hours, Multiple Doctor, Phil appearances, and now this podcast, and the core talking points recur nearly verbatim across them. The intruder theory anchored to Lou Smith's findings, the criticism of Boulder police as inexperienced, and the framing of himself as spontaneous and unprepared. That consistency isn't incidental. According to his own account of that first morning, within hours of learning police suspected him, a family friend, a former Boulder County prosecutor, took the unusual step of arranging criminal defense counsel before John had spoken with detectives in any formal capacity, and attorneys have managed the family's public communications ever since. A message that has been restated with this much internal consistency for 3 decades, delivered as if freshly spontaneous each time, is closer to a well-rehearsed position than an unscripted reaction.
Even, so I know in the Dr. Phil, one of the things that came out was the idea that you used a flashlight to put him to sleep and that he came back down to play with a toy. Like when he's down and people are sleeping, has he ever talked, like, did he get the sense that someone else was in the home? Did he hear anything? I don't know how long was he up?
No, we've never asked him that. I don't know. I didn't know, frankly, that he got up again. I'm not sure he did. Again, that's fiction. There's so much fiction out there.
Because it's just thrown out there. It's just Dr. Phil who says, you got up to play with a toy, and Burke says, yeah, I did. It was something that I wanted to put together. And then it kind of just like
Well,
away.
Again, when we got home, John had fallen asleep.
But I know you and Burke
I
came.
put her to bed. Burke and I sat down and tried to put together one of his little toys for a little while, just because he wanted to. And then he went off to bed.
You're saying like that whatever Dr. Phil said and Burke said on the show, he didn't come back down?
I didn't know that he came back down if he did.
Does
He
stuff
may
like
have-
that make you want to be like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something he knows?
Burke would have said something if something was weird, but
Okay.
he may have misunderstood the question
Sure.
too. That
Asked about Burke sneaking downstairs to play with a toy the night of the murder, something Burke himself confirmed on Dr. Phil in 2016, John calls it fiction and says, "I didn't know frankly that he got up." This is code C2, timeline mismatch with digital data, cross-referencing a claim about who was awake and where against physical evidence and recorded statements. Cross-referenced against the case file, the fiction framing doesn't hold up well. Burke's own fingerprints were recovered from a glass of iced tea in the kitchen sitting beside the pineapple bowl, physically placing him downstairs that night, a detail neither John nor Patsy has disputed. On the 911 call itself, a 1998 leaked transcript of an enhanced version, later independently reproduced by CBS's The Case of John Ramsey investigative team, led by former FBI profiler Jim Clemente and criminal analyst Laura Richards, in September 2016, appears to capture three voices in the background after Patsy believed the line had disconnected. One of them, a child's voice asking, "What did you find?" That reading is genuinely disputed. Journalist Paula Woodward's 2021 book Unsolved notes that formal audio testing has never reliably confirmed Burke's voice on the tape. And Rolling Stone's contemporaneous reporting criticized Clemente's team for not initially disclosing that their independent read matched the leaked 1998 transcript word for word. What isn't disputed is that Burke himself, decades later, directly confirmed being downstairs that night. Calling his own son's own account fiction isn't a neutral gap in memory. It's a direct rejection of the one first-hand account that should carry the most weight.
Why 118? That's something that everyone's obsessed with.
yeah, it meant something to the killer.
What do you think it means? Like, I mean,
Well,
again,
the only number that correlates that I know of is my bonus that year from Lockheed was $118,000, and it was paid in January.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're in December. It was on my pay stub
did you have those somewhere in the house?
Oh yeah, I'm sure laying around somewhere.
Did they ever find them?
I don't know.
So
Somebody
it comes
was-
back to somebody who's like, so clearly they know she's in the basement. They're not actually looking to get the money, but you think it was more of a message?
I think it was a mix. I mean, why not $1 million? Why not 500? Why not a big number?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big number, but doable. And why 118? Why not 100? Why not 200?
150?
It meant something to somebody.
Asked why the ransom demand was set at exactly $118,000, John confirms this matched his actual Lockheed Martin bonus that year, paid the following January, and frames the coincidence as proof the killer specifically targeted him. This is code C4, staging mismatch, checking whether a piece of evidence fits an outside intruder narrative or fits a narrative built from information only someone inside the house would have. Cross-referenced against forensic document examiner practice, the note itself argues against an outside intruder in more ways than the number. It was handwritten on a notepad and with a pen from inside the Ramsey home. The notepad's indentation on the next sheet was matched to it, meaning whoever wrote it either brought no supplies of their own or didn't need to. FBI-trained document examiners who reviewed the case, including former profiler John Douglas himself in his own published assessment, noted the letter's unusually specific personal knowledge. Not just the exact bonus figure, but references understood only within the family's financial situation. A genuine outside kidnapper demanding a round, arbitrary sum is the far more common pattern. A ransom figure that precisely mirrors private financial information usually points towards someone with access to that information, not someone reading it off a business card. John's framing, It meant something to the killer. Treats the coincidence as proof of a stranger's specific vendetta, without addressing the far simpler read. It's the kind of number an insider, not an outsider, would think to use.
The thing that I think other people don't understand, that this is the one that was hard for me, is like it's said over and over by Linda Arndt that you and Patsy are just like completely separated. What was your
Well,
interpretation
Patsy
of that?
was literally sitting on the floor with a big bowl in front of her, ready to throw up, quite honestly. She was devastated. And so she was over there, that's fine, that's okay. I was focused on trying to get John Bonet back. How do I get the money together? He wanted $118,000 in an attaché case. How do I get the cash together? I was working on that. I got to get my daughter back. That was my focus. Patsy's okay.
She's got friends around her.
She had friends around her. I got to get my daughter back.
That was the other thing. Linda says in her interpretation of things that you disappear for an hour.
That's not true.
Yeah.
No. I was looking out the window occasionally to see if I could see anything. But no, I didn't disappear for an hour. Linda Arndt was nuts. She, on national television, said, well, I knew he was guilty because I saw it in his eyes. I thought, well, that's quite a talent. But she was way in over her head and I don't think she was playing with a full deck.
Confronted with Linda Arndt's contemporaneous observations that he appeared unusually composed, that he and Patsy stayed apart for much of that morning, that the 10 a.m. deadline passed with little visible reaction, John doesn't address the substance. He dismisses the source. Linda Arndt was nuts. I don't think she's playing with a full deck. This is code D5. Attacking investigators/media. Discrediting the credibility of the person raising an inconvenient observation rather than engaging with the observation itself. Cross-referenced against the independent record, Arndt's own account, examined at length in her own 1999 ABC Time Tunnel interview and her subsequent federal lawsuit, Arndt vs. Kobe, 10th Circuit, 2002, shows a detective explicitly noting these details without drawing conclusions from them at the time. If someone has a response that is different from mine, I don't put judgment to it. I just note it. The specific details she logged that morning, mail reading during an active kidnapping, the couple staying apart, the muted reaction when the 10 a.m. deadline passed, are the same details independent investigators and journalists have treated as significant in the decades since, entirely apart from Arndt's own credibility. Discrediting the observer doesn't address why those specific observations, logged in real time before any theory had formed, kept resurfacing as relevant years later.
So you think that he went up to her room first, got her there, and then took her to the basement?
Yeah.
And do you have any, and I know this is like a little bit of details I know you've lived with for a long time. Do they have any ideas about what the intention was? Like what some of the sexual activity, some of the choking was like to cover something up?
Lou Smith, this detective that was brought out of retirement, legendary detective in Colorado, solved over 200 homicides. Amazing man.
Yeah.
Was brought in by the DA because I think the DA suspected the police had it kind of messed up. Lou spent a couple months looking at the evidence and very conclusively, in his mind, said, no, there's lots of evidence of an intruder. His theory was it was a kidnapping gone wrong based on the evidence. And I've always thought those two conflicted between John Douglas's theory and Lou's, but somebody pointed out to me, well, no, they don't necessarily conflict. And it's like, yeah, you're right.
Do they think that the person wrote the note while that he's in the house waiting for you guys to come home?
John Douglas said nobody could write a 3-page ransom note after murdering a child.
Okay, so that's done earlier.
Their warped brain is going crazy. And he said that note was written before.
Where do you assume it went wrong? So if he wrote this note to get her out, like why does he take her to the basement?
Walking through his working theory of the crime, John states as established fact that the experts believe a stun gun was used to silence JonBenet before she was moved to the basement. This is code A4 again, checking a claim framed as expert consensus against the actual state of expert opinion. Cross-referenced against the forensic record, the experts is an overstatement of a genuinely divided dispute. The theory originates with retired detective Lou Smith, who measured the 2 marks on JonBenet's back and cheek at roughly 3.5 centimeters apart, a distance he matched to certain stun gun models. And Arapahoe County coroner, Dr. Michael Doberson, replicated similar-looking marks by testing a stun gun on anesthetized pigskin. But the theory has been directly disputed by named sources with equal or greater standing. Forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz, featured in CBS's 2016 The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, concluded the marks were not consistent with an electrical burn at all. And Stephen Tuttle, a spokesperson for Air Taser, the specific brand Smith's theory pointed to, told the Boulder Daily Camera directly that the company had never seen those types of marks from its own product, and that the theory defies the logic of what the weapon does. A theory contested by the manufacturer of the weapon in question and by a named forensic pathologist isn't settled expert consensus. It's one side of an active, still unresolved dispute that John's framing collapses into certainty.
Do you feel like you'll always have the indictment kind of hanging over you until there's someone else who's indicted?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be, it's an unknown.
Is there any, like, does that mean anything now? Like, could somebody say, oh, we have this indictment from 30 years ago, we can still go charge John? Or would they have to get a new grand jury indictment? Like, is it, I don't know how
I don't
scary
know.
of a looming thing that is.
Yeah, I don't know. The grand jury, as I'm told, you can convict a ham sandwich in a grand jury. It's a one-sided argument.
Right.
It's easy to get an indictment.
It is. It's just the prosecution's
Yeah.
case. But you guys weren't asked to even speak at that, were you?
I offered to do that,
Yeah.
and they didn't ask me.
Asked about the 1999 grand jury indictment hanging over him, John frames the entire grand jury process as inherently one-sided. You can convict a ham sandwich in a grand jury, and notes he was never even asked to testify. This is code A4A, checking a dismissive framing against what the documented grand jury record actually shows. Cross-referenced against the unsealed court record, this framing leaves out what actually happened. According to documents unsealed by court order in October 2013, reported at the time by CNN and NBC News, the Boulder grand jury heard evidence from September 1998 to October 1999, more than a year, including testimony and materials from investigators sympathetic to the intruder theory, such as Lou Smith himself. At the end of that year-long process, the 12 jurors voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey on 2 counts each: child abuse resulting in death, a Class 2 felony carrying up to 48 years, and being accessories to a crime by assisting someone they knew or suspected had committed murder. Then District Attorney Alex Hunter chose not to sign the indictment on October 13, 1999, stating publicly, "I and my prosecutorial team believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges." A decision about the odds of conviction beyond a reasonable doubt, not a statement that the grand jury's findings were baseless. One juror later told the Boulder Daily Camera, "We didn't know who did what, but we feel the adults in the house may have done something that they certainly could have prevented, or they could have helped her, and they didn't." A year of formal proceedings that produced an actual voted indictment on 2 specific charges is a different thing than the single-sided rubber stamp caricature ham sandwich implies. And the detail that grand jurors, not just prosecutors, reached that conclusion after hearing the defense's own evidence is the part left out of the answer. A ransom figure that matched his own bonus, framed as proof of a stranger's grudge. A detective's field notes, dismissed as the ravings of someone not playing with a full deck. A suitcase he says he flagged before the body was found, 4 months before the paper trail agrees. A grand jury he calls a ham sandwich process, one that spent over a year on the evidence and still voted to indict. What do you think really happened in that house? Leave a comment below. Subscribe for more analysis in this case series.